Thank you. Welcome again, everyone. We appreciate you joining us today. The National Caucus and Center on Black Aging and Amgen. So our two presenters today are going to speak on, as we see, Black Americans more likely to be diagnosed with asthma, but underrepresented in clinical trials. Our first presenter, Natalie Cheyenne-Smith, graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in May 2022 with a Bachelor of Arts in Public Health. While in university, Natalie participated in laboratory research with the Kofer Lab to investigate molecular events that underlie brain plasticity and deterioration in the face of stress and neurological insults throughout life. She also served as a health worker for the University Tang, T-A-N-G, Medical Center to act as a liaison between students, faculty, and staff and medical resources offered by the university and community. Because of her passion for health advocacy, Natalie serves as a health educator for the Rifkin Center to empower individuals with the knowledge and tools for early detection, prevention, and self-advocacy so they can be proactive about their health. We need that, Natalie. Thank you. Since graduation, Natalie has been working at Amgen as an associate for the Career Discovery Program. Currently, she is a member of the RISE Representation in Clinical Research team, working to improving the diversity and representation of participants in the company's clinical trials. Our next presenter, Dr. Bill Lester, an Arkansas native, earned a PhD in physiology from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis. Following a postdoctoral fellowship in heart failure at the University of Cincinnati, Bill began his industry career as a medical science liaison, or MSL, with Solvay. Prior to taking on his current role as an allergy asthma MSL at Amgen, Bill supported cardiology at Amgen as well as medical teams at Eli Lilly and Takeda. Over his 24 years of experience, Bill has supported the development and launch of numerous new products in respiratory, endocrinology, and cardiovascular disease states. He and his wife live in suburban Fort Worth, Texas, and have 3 children aged 27, 25, and 21. He has a passion for educating patients, their families, and healthcare practitioners about severe asthma. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Bill, for joining us today. Natalie, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela. That was a very, very kind introduction. And like she said, my name is Natalie Cheyenne-Smith. It's such a pleasure to get to be here today to speak with you all. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with my portion of the presentation, and then I'm going to pass it off to Bill later on. So firstly, my topic is focusing on increasing diversity and representation in clinical research and how we are evolving Amgen's approach to do this. And I'm going to get into some details about why this is important, how this impacts everyone's health, how this impacts public health, and how we're trying to advance towards health equity. So before I get into what we're doing at Amgen, I just want to level set with everyone and talk about why diversity in clinical trials and clinical research matters. So first of all, as some of you may know, but for those of you who don't, clinical trials are actually a very important part of making new medications. And the volunteer participants who are part of those trials make vital contributions to the research and how we ultimately choose to use or not use certain medications, how safe we determine that they are, how effective we determine that they are. So when some groups are underrepresented or not represented at all in clinical trials for these new medicines, then there's a risk that we might actually not collect all the data that we need to assess their effectiveness and safety in those specific populations. So, for example, if you are a Black American and you take, oh my gosh, what is it called? You take certain generic medications that have been on the market for quite some time, there's a chance that there might not have been a single Black individual in those clinical trials. And things like ibuprofen and that are used every single day, you know, you're using them without knowing a lot about how they would have been reacted to in clinical trials. So racial and or ethnic background in combination with other interdependent factors, such as social determinants of health, which is something that some of you may be familiar with. This is like your environment, your diet, the foods that you eat, the exercise that you do, which are considered things that are in your control sometimes. Sometimes your environment isn't in your control, but a lot of those things are under your control, right? And genetics, which are not in your control, you're just born with those. But all of these things combined can contribute to the differences in drug exposure or response. So clinical research contributes to scientific knowledge for treatment options that will benefit not only patients, but also physicians and just research as a whole. The only way we can get towards health equity is if we make sure that we have everyone participating. And I want to underscore that once we're in the phases of clinical trials, drugs have gone through many phases prior to get them to a point where they can be used to treat people. So we know there's a certain level of safety, there's a certain level of, you know, responsibility that people who are conducting the trials, they know that this is not necessarily going to harm the population. It's not very common. You're not, you know, you shouldn't be thinking of yourself as a lab rat in these situations because it's really beyond that phase. And that's also what I'm here to kind of debunk with you today. So getting into our team at Amgen and what we are doing in the industry. So I'm actually part of an incredible team at Amgen, as Angela mentioned earlier. It's called the Representation and Clinical Research Team. Our initiatives are basically very public health focused within the biotech pharmaceutical industry. And so we have environmental, social, and government commitments, including a commitment to improving health equity. And so having representative product development is basically essential if we ever want to actually fully fulfill that commitment. So what my team does at Amgen, as Angela also did a great job explaining, but I'll just say it again, we're actually a team at Amgen that is dedicated to improving clinical trial diversity and proportional representation by addressing the systemic issues that deter people from participating in research, especially focusing on those who have been excluded due to race, ethnicity, sex, age, and many, many other factors. So it's not just about encouraging you to participate in research. It's also about empowering you in your health. It's also about educating you about how you can be your own health advocate. It's about building trust with communities. And we don't do this alone. We know that there are really, really incredible organizations that exist that we partner with to facilitate those relationships, to help build trust, to empower the communities. And again, I'll get into that a little bit later. So our objectives as the RISE team, we want to exceed enrollment benchmarks. So we have current industry benchmarks for what proportional representation looks like, and we want to continue to exceed those and make a new standard of what good looks like. We also try to build infrastructure that is sustainable, both internally and externally, and I'll give some examples of what that looks like on the next slide as well. And like I said, we want to collaborate and scale. We collaborate not only with our internal cross-functional partners within the company, but we also partner with a ton of community organizations who are doing really, really incredible work in the communities. And we want to continue to scale and know that, you know, although sometimes we have projects and we have things that go really well. There's always ways that we can improve. There's always ways we can continue to be more culturally competent. And we just want to continue to keep ourselves honest and improve in the work that we're doing as we go along. So a little bit more about the team. We operate by collaborating, like I said, across internal functions and also engaging externally with our partners out there across the nation and even worldwide. So our team is driven by 6 pillars. First of all, we want to evolve the way we design and run clinical trials, like I said, focusing on people who have been historically excluded from clinical trials. So what that looks like is having people who, the PIs is what we call them, who are like the physicians who are in charge of running the clinical trials. We need them to be representative too, so that when you go in as a minority patient, you feel comfortable, you see a doctor who looks like you, who understands your culture, who understands your background, who really makes you feel comfortable in that space. And then we also want to change how researchers communicate with patients, caregivers, and providers. There has to be, understanding in the conversation. People don't need to use complex language, especially with patients. It's really important that doctors and researchers understand that, you want to know what's going on too. You want to be in the loop about the treatments you're getting, about how they're affecting your health, how they're helping you. We don't just want to continue in this world where doctors just prescribe you something, you go into research just because a clinical trial was recommended to you and you don't really know what's going on. That needs to change. And that's what we're also trying to support. We also partner with clinical trial investigators who are representative of the participants, like I said. We also want to enhance precision medicine awareness and improve genetic diversity in translational science. This is all about making science even more catered to the individual. And as technology is advancing, that's going to continue to improve. So a lot of exciting things hopefully will be coming in the next, 10 and 20 and beyond years. We also want to bring the research directly to communities where people live and work. We can't expect people in rural communities to drive sometimes for multiple days, even just to get to the closest research hospital. So we're working really hard to provide funding for hospitals to start their own research and clinical trials in mainly rural and underserved communities, so that people have access to this, so that they don't have to, drive for 10 hours to get to the closest hospital just to get one bout of treatment for 10 minutes and then to drive that whole distance back once a week. That's not realistic. And that's what's contributing to, the failure of the representation. And lastly, we want to collaborate with national and community organizations. And so that's why we're here today. We have a ton of other incredible organizations, as I mentioned, that I'll show you on another slide, that we work with and continue to build those relationships. So just to show you some examples of the work that we're doing and some of our key highlights from this year. So first of all, we try to provide innovation in clinical trial design for representative enrollment. So we're currently working on a really, really exciting study. It's called the African American Heart Study, which is a first of its kind collaborative study partnered with the Association of Black Cardiologists, or ABC, and the Morehouse School of Medicine located in Atlanta, Georgia. And the purpose of this study is to measure the association between a biomarker called lipoprotein a, or LP a. It's kind of an up and coming topic. So maybe if you've seen LP a, that's a biomarker of heart disease, and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, also known as ASCVD, and 5,000 African American individuals across the US. So the whole point of this study, it's not a clinical trial like many others, where it's about providing medication for one group and having a placebo group and seeing how medications, how effective they are, or having a certain treatment and another alternative treatment option. It's not about the treatment as much as it's about discovering how lipoprotein a impacts Black and African Americans' health. And this is also not just about determining the association between Lp(a) and heart disease. It's also getting to the fundamentals of what is contributing to health equity and what is contributing to Black and African Americans in this country having such worse health outcomes compared to a lot of other people, if not everyone else. So that's the purpose of the study. It's really, really exciting. We're in the enrollment phase right now. So that's kind of ongoing. If anyone has any more questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A session at the end. We have a great website as well. And the design and protocol for this study is to prioritize community engagement and to have representative HCPs, which is healthcare practitioners, easy navigation, minimize the burden, and have a thoughtful use of technology to build those unexperienced sites, like I said. So the purpose, another part of the study is we're really getting into communities. We're funding for very small research centers and hospital centers to be able to conduct these studies so we can reach as many people as possible. The whole point of this is to determine how these structural barriers are impacting health. So if we aren't trying to mitigate those barriers by reaching people, then we would, you know, how could we say that we're trying to make a difference if we aren't doing these things? So that's a really exciting study. And then getting into workforce development. So Amgen has recently committed $8 million to the Robert A. Wynn Diversity in Clinical Trials program. And so the whole idea of this program is it's meant to transform the clinical research landscape by providing an immersive experience in community-based clinical research. And it's supporting physicians and medical students from diverse and racial ethnic backgrounds and others who are underrepresented in medicine to be a part of this program. Whereas they normally might be excluded, they're actually prioritized. So that's building, you know, workforce and trying to do our best to increase more representation in our physicians and medical professionals, because we need more. And another example of how we're doing this is the RISE team. Actually, recently this past summer hosted our third and largest cohort of undergrad interns. We're trying to build careers very, very early and motivate people to want to make a difference in their communities and nationwide and globally. And so we recruited in collaboration with minority serving institutions or programs specifically focused in increasing diversity to build these future leaders. So they were an incredible group of people, and we are actually having double the size cohort next summer for our interns, which is really exciting. Lastly, with our community engagements and sponsorships, this is a quote from our ED, and our motto really for our team is we move at the speed of trust. And that means moving at the speed of trust with the communities that we're trying to work with, that we're trying to empower. And like I said, we can do this work on our own, but what good would that do? We really, really value our partnerships with our community partners. And so these are just some examples. Today is an example with NCBA, and we also work with Black Health Matters Health Summits. They have quarterly summits that we attend and present at and engage with the attendees. We also have contributed to the blackdoctor.org awareness campaigns. We host a few of their videos of patients sharing their stories on our websites. And we also attend the Balm and Gilead's Healthy Churches Conference to improve awareness and interest in clinical research in Black communities. This is a really small list because there's actually a lot more community engagement organizations that we work with, and a lot that are actually in the works, and really, really exciting things to come in the new year when it comes to community engagement and community empowerment. So if we have this presentation all over again next year, I'll have a lot more to share with you. So here on this slide, you just get an idea of the range of the partnerships that we work with, not just in the United States, but also globally. We're trying to also continue to develop our global relationships. So, but right now our impact is really focused on the US and underserved and underrepresented groups in the US. So that's it from me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Bill, and we'll address all questions at the end during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Did we do the slide transition as it was supposed to go?
It was perfect.
Oh, outstanding. Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you, Angela, for inviting us to present today. We're going to, as Angela mentioned, I'm Bill Lester. We live in suburban Fort Worth. We're going to transition now, and we're going to talk specifically about severe asthma. And our program is called, the acronym is LUMA, and it stands for Learn to Understand and Manage Severe Asthma. And our goal is that we're hopeful that we can empower you to stand against severe asthma. As we go through the program today, most of the time I'm going to be speaking as if everybody in the audience has severe asthma. But to me, if we're going to empower folks with severe asthma to take a stand, we also have to empower those folks that are their healthcare providers, are their friends, are their confidants, their relatives. Basically, we would empower everybody to help those folks that are suffering with asthma to be able to better manage and take a stand against their disease. Okay. So we're going to start off by giving a little context of asthma in the Black community. And this kind of dovetails to what Natalie just said, and that there are disparities in clinical research. Well, just as there are disparities in clinical research, the same is true for the prevalence of severe asthma and asthma in the Black community. So these are the staggering numbers, the statistics that we can look at. And in general, asthma is disproportionately diagnosed in Black Americans. And then if you look at the second and fourth panels, when you look at Black Americans and compare them with white Americans, Black Americans are about 6 times more likely to have to visit the emergency room or the emergency department because of their asthma. And if you look at, well, the hospitalization rate because of asthma, it's 5 times higher among Black Americans compared with white Americans. And then in the third panel, if you look at mortality, you'll notice that Black Americans are 3 times more likely to die from asthma compared with white Americans. And if you look at the mortality rates overall, the highest mortality rates are among Black women. So I think these numbers are staggering. And it's very fair to ask, well, what are some of these factors that are helping to drive these disparities? Unfortunately, we only have about, 30 minutes left. We could take the next several days to discuss all these potential factors that are contributing to the disease and to the disparities. We can spend a lot of time talking about these. We don't have that time. But in general, you can kind of put them in different buckets. So, you can think about social factors such as poverty might be playing a role. You can think about racism. In terms of behavioral factors, Natalie's already spoken about perhaps their negative beliefs and distrusts about not just clinical research, but about the healthcare environment as a whole. Then maybe their environmental issues like folks living in close proximity to industrial pollution, things like that. And as Natalie mentioned, there could also be genetic, influences at play. So again, there are a lot of potential factors in a lot of different buckets that we could talk about that are helping to drive disparities in asthma. Likewise, if we had a lot more time, we could think about the different types of strategies that we can consider to address these problems. So for instance, we could discuss the possibility of how policy might be used to affect healthcare insurance coverage. Maybe there would be policies to eliminate or decrease pollution and exposure to potential triggers that make people's asthma worse. Natalie's already spoken to us about if you're looking at ways, related to research about how to approach the problem. Well, she's already talking about trying to drive increased enrollment of minority populations in clinical research. So this is also going to include increasing the number of folks of researchers, the research, kind of group that is more racially and ethnically diverse. Partnerships are really important. As we've talked about today, we've got partnerships with a number of organizations, and we're thankful that we have the opportunity to help provide some context and some education. Hopefully this is going to address disparities. And then I think today we're just showing a practical example, and we're hopeful that today's educational program will help improve communication between you and your healthcare provider. Or if it's somebody you're taking care of, you're going to help them understand their disease better. And all in all, we're going to help address some of these disparities. So we're now going to transition into actually talking about asthma and our program, the acronym Learning to Understand and Manage Your Asthma. It's called LUMA, is what we call our acronym, as I mentioned. We're going to dive in and look at some of these big letters one by one. The first one we're going to look at is we're going to hopefully teach you and help you learn that asthma is a chronic disease of airway inflammation. So when you look at the definition, I think one of the first things to consider is the fact that asthma is a chronic disease. And that just means it's a disease that goes on, it perseveres, it lasts a long time. And if the symptoms may go away, but they're probably going to come back, they're going to recur. So asthma is a chronic disease. And the next term that we might want to look at is inflammation. Now, this is something that you might not be able to sit down and write an essay about how to define inflammation, but I think you've experienced it and you know it when you see it. So if you've been bitten by a mosquito, if you've been stung by a bee or a wasp, or if you've hit your thumb with a hammer, you've seen inflammation, right? Another thing that we in the South have to deal with are fire ants. So if you've been stung or bitten by fire ants, you see inflammation work very quickly. And inflammation is what it is. It's your body's immune system trying to deal with insults, injuries, insect bites, things like that. And you've seen it. It's swelling, it's itching, it's maybe wheals or hives or bumps. These are all ideas of inflammation. Now, if we look down at the picture, we can start thinking about what does this have to do with airways, and what's the deal with airways? Well, as a science geek, I like to geek out about science, and so to me, it's really cool that air is made up of 21% oxygen. And as you know, oxygen is required for every single cell in the body to live. So the airways, or you can think of basically the pipes that get the air, which has the oxygen, deep into the lungs, so that air, or actually the oxygen, can be loaded into the blood and distributed throughout the body to get to all the tissues. So you can think about the air as pipes, as a liquid that's just flowing through pipes. On the left-hand side is a patient who doesn't have asthma. This patient can come in contact with different triggers that may be a problem for somebody else, but their airway stays open. They can move a lot of air through there. It's almost like the freeway. All 5 lanes of traffic, you can move plenty of air through there to meet the demands of the body. Now, in the middle picture, this represents a patient with asthma. And patients with asthma, their airways are characterized by having inflammation. So as you can see, this inflammation leads to swelling in the airways. And these airways are more narrow. The pipe is more narrow. You can't move as much water. If you think about, air being a liquid, you can't move as much air. And so that's going to make it more difficult to breathe. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, this is a patient who has asthma. This patient already has inflammation in the airways. This patient breathes in something from the air that causes more of an inflammatory response, which causes mucus and all these things. The bottom line is the pipe, the airway, gets even smaller, makes it even more difficult to breathe. And this narrowing of the airway is what results is what you end up seeing as a patient as, okay, now my slides are not advancing, y'all. There we go. Okay. Sorry, everybody. All right. We are advancing too far now. Okay. So in a situation of asthma and you're having an asthma exacerbation, your airways are detecting these triggers that cause more inflammation, more tightening, and that leads to the coughing, the chest tightness, the shortness of breath, and the wheezing that are the hallmark symptoms of asthma. Now, one thing we're going to start here, we want you to understand that asthma is a disease that's unique to each patient. So as a patient with asthma, you may have coughing, you may have shortness of breath, but not wheezing, not chest tightness. You may have all four of these symptoms. You may experience a couple of them. And the symptoms that you experience as an asthma patient may change over time. But the thing that we're trying to, I think it's important for you to understand that asthma is, individuals with asthma, you've got a unique experience with the disease. So on this slide, we're going to talk about what's it like when you go to the doctor. Maybe you think you have asthma, so you've made an appointment to go see your healthcare provider. What's going to happen? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to ask a lot of nosy questions related to your medical history. They're going to say things like, do you have allergies? Does somebody in your family have allergies? Does anybody in your family have asthma? So that's going to give some clues to the provider. They're also going to do a physical exam, which means they're going to look, listen, and feel. They're going to listen to your heart, listen to your lungs. You also may be asked to do some pulmonary function tests, which means you may be using a spirometer, and this is going to provide the provider with numbers that tell how well your lungs are functioning. And finally, you may be asked they may draw some blood. And the blood is going to offer some clues about specifically about your disease that may offer the physician some direction on how to treat your disease. So another thing that may come up during a discussion with your healthcare provider about asthma is you may be told that you have severe asthma. And the question is, well, what does that mean? Severe asthma just means that that you have the disease is severe enough that it requires that you take a high dose inhaled steroid plus another asthma controller medicine, and you may even have to take additional oral steroids to control your disease. Well, that leads to the next question, and that is, what does control mean when you think about asthma? Well, let's assume you have severe asthma and you're taking the drugs that you've been prescribed as you're supposed to take them. You're doing things in your lives to reduce your exposure to the things that make your asthma worse, or the triggers. So if you do all these things, but still have symptoms of asthma, that means your asthma is uncontrolled. So you can have severe and uncontrolled asthma. As a patient or as a caregiver or a friend, somebody adjacent to a patient, it's important to always be on the lookout for indicators that may be suggestive that your asthma is severe and or uncontrolled. And so there's a rule of two, such that if you have daytime symptoms, or if you're having to use an acute inhaler more than twice a week, those are indicators to suggest that you may have severe and or uncontrolled asthma. Likewise, if you're waking up at night because of your disease, this is an important indicator. And let's say that you normally are able to walk from the subway station down to the grocery store, or you're typically able to jog, but now you can't jog because you have wheezing, difficulty breathing, cough. These are all indicators that your disease may be not controlled like it should be and may be severe. This next slide is important for y'all. And the idea here is that I think a lot of us always think we're alone with whatever disease we're facing. This is to show us that you're not. Asthma affects almost 25 million people in the United States. And remember, we just talked about severe asthma, and many as 10% or 2.5 million Americans have severe asthma. And of these, roughly half, or 1.25 million folks in America who have severe asthma, their disease is uncontrolled. So again, it's important to know that, yeah, you're unique in how you experience the disease, but you're not unique in the fact that nobody else has it. You're in this fight with, 2.5, 25 million, 1.25 million people in the United States. Bottom line is, you're not alone. We're going to dig a little bit more into and try to understand how the immune system can be an underlying cause of asthma. And as we do this, we're going to start to talk, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about asthma triggers and asthma irritants. So we've alluded to this just a little bit, but another science geek thing that's kind of cool to me is that in a given day, all of us are going to breathe in or inhale about 2,000 gallons of air. And anything that you breathe in contains, anything that you breathe in is going to get into your lungs, right? So if you live in a city and there's pollution, you're standing by the bus stop and there's diesel fumes, there are allergens like pollen, there are dust mites, there's pet dander, bacteria and viruses. Anytime you inhale, you're breathing in these types of triggers. And these triggers can activate your immune system, ramp it up, if you will, and make your asthma worse. Now, other things that can lead to triggering your immune system that's going to exacerbate your asthma include extremes in weather, like extreme cold or hot, or maybe high humidity. Exercise, like we mentioned, is a big factor. I have a friend who used to jog regularly. One day she went out there and started jogging, but she couldn't breathe. And so that turns out that's an example of exercise-induced asthma. Lying, laughing, crying, and stress are all also examples of irritants that can make your asthma worse. Now, like we've said before, you know how each patient is going to experience the symptoms in a unique fashion. The same is true for triggers. Some people may be triggered by pollen and pollution, but not dust mites, or maybe not pet dander. And it's also important to note that the triggers can change over time. And so something that triggered you as a kid may not as an adult, or vice versa. Okay, Angela, okay, here we go. So let's dig a little deeper in trying to connect these two things, connect the asthma with these irritants and the triggers, and what it has to do with the immune system. So in a healthy immune system, as we know, is your body's the various mechanisms that work together to try to fight off bacteria, viruses, and try to repair injuries. So in folks that don't have asthma, oftentimes the immune system is going to be working and you're not going to be able to see it. We would almost think of it as there would be normal responses to triggers. Another way to think about this is that in patients with asthma, their immune systems may respond overly aggressively, over eagerly, may respond to something too much as compared to somebody without asthma. Or you can think that maybe the immune system reacts to some trigger in a patient with asthma that it wouldn't normally, or wouldn't respond to, or try to attack, if you will, in a patient without asthma. So that's kind of the connection between the triggers and starting the immune system. Now, when we think about, okay, what does it mean to activate or trigger the immune system, and what does that have to do with my asthma? Well, as you can see here, these are examples of some of the triggers that we talked about. So like pollen from trees, grass, flowers, things like that, industrial pollution, viruses, and bacteria. So remember, we breathe in about 2,000 gallons of air per day. Everything you breathe in, all this air, anything that's in the air comes in contact with the cells that line those airways or those pipes. And these cells that line the airways are called epithelial cells, or are called the epithelium. And as a scientist, it's really, really cool because it's fascinating that these epithelial cells can recognize these various triggers that you breathe in that are in the air. And these triggers, in turn, the epithelial cells recognize the triggers, and they activate or mobilize various combinations of immune cells. And these combinations of immune cells working together produce chemicals and other types of reactions that ramp up or increase the immune responses, and that ultimately lead to what we talked about with the airway tightening. And so that's where you get the coughing, the chest tightness, the wheezing, all these symptoms. And ultimately, these are the things that may lead to asthma attacks and may result in hospitalizations. So I think hopefully we've shown you that there's a connection here that triggers, and remember, triggers are specific for each patient, but they're going to turn on certain immune cells. It's going to lead to immune responses. And these responses are going to activate these combination of immune cells. And so that's one of the reasons you talked about blood tests earlier. When they take blood tests, they can figure out which specific immune cells are driving your disease and which treatments may be specifically directed at specific cells. So now we're going to march on and we're going to look at the M in LUMA, and this is to manage the role that you can play in your asthma care. And I can't think of really any better analogies, but the bedrock, the foundation, you can kind of insert your own analogy here, but a really vital part of you dealing with your disease, or if you're somebody helping somebody deal with the disease, helping them deal with the disease, is to develop a really robust asthma action plan. And chances are, if you have severe asthma, you've already got one of these. The healthcare providers love these for lots of good reasons. But if you develop an asthma action plan, this is going to help you understand how to look for your triggers, how to treat your symptoms, how to manage your symptoms, how to live well, and how to live so that you can stay well. And so an asthma action plan is going to be based on three different legs of the triangle. So it's going to involve lifestyle changes, it's going to involve your asthma journal, and it's going to talk about medications. So we're going to talk about each one of these as we go along. So on the left-hand side, this is where you can ask yourself, okay, I know what my triggers are. Let's say, for instance, I'm allergic to dogs. And well, if you're allergic to dogs, that may stimulate your immune system, which is going to make your asthma worse. So what can I do in my lifestyle to help to prevent that, to prevent or lessen the effects of allergies on my disease? Well, if you let your dogs sleep in the bed with you or let them sleep in the bedroom, perhaps it's a better idea to let them sleep outside of your bedroom. Another thing would be, let's say you're allergic to dust mites or dust. Well, then one thing you can do around the house to help lessen the role that dust plays in making your disease worse is vacuum your carpets, wash your sheets and your blankets, use allergy covers, things like that. We also talked about extremes in weather. So maybe one of your triggers or something, an irritant that makes you worse, is high humidity. So then you'd want to put a dehumidifier in your room. Now, on the right-hand side, we talk a lot about healthy choices. And I'm sure you hear this a lot. Okay, it's really important to maintain healthy weight and to eat heart-healthy foods and to register exercise regularly. Well, some other things that you can think about in healthy choices may help decrease irritants that are helping, or triggers that are helping to drive your asthma. So let's say that you work in a stressful environment. You're an air traffic controller, for instance. Well, that's a stressful job. And if you know that stress is something that helps drive your asthma, then perhaps you can get counseling or somebody to help you better manage your stress, therefore decreasing the probability that stress is going to contribute to your disease. You know, another really big one here is to obviously stop smoking, but to avoid, you know, letting folks smoke in your home and things like that. So these are some things you can do as part of your asthma action plan to, you know, to decrease things that help trigger your asthma. Now, the next part of the asthma plan is to develop an asthma journal. And to me, the basic idea here is that the more data that you can provide with your healthcare provider, the better he or she can better tailor treatment to your specific situation. Remember, you're unique as an asthma patient, not, you know, you're unique as a person, but you're also unique as an asthma patient. You have specific combinations of triggers, you know, things in your environment. And so it's really important for you to write all these down. Think of it as an autobiography or having a diary. So it's important to, you know, record when you have an exacerbation, what might have triggered it, what time of the day was it. It's important to record taking your medicines properly at the right time. You need to write down, okay, what was the limitation? Like I tried to play tennis yesterday, but I couldn't because I was wheezing. Well, you want to write that down. What was the time? What was going on? All these things, these pieces of information are what make you as a patient suffering with asthma. And this information is vital for your healthcare provider. Now, the third leg of the triangle is for you to be familiar with the classifications of drugs that you may be prescribed. Again, as a unique patient, you may be prescribed one of these or all of these or combinations. It's important just to understand the overall purpose. So, for instance, if you look at allergy medicines, we know that if you're triggered by certain allergies, the physicians can give you medicines that can control your allergic responses to these allergies, and that's going to help decrease the inflammation driving your asthma. You also may be taking short-acting or rescue inhalers. These are going to be typically like the beta agonists, and these are going to be to treat the acute symptoms like the wheezing, difficulty breathing, things like that. You may also be taking long-acting controllers. These are kind of like, you can think of them as the, I guess the baseline or the, well, I guess the baseline is the way to put it. The long-acting controllers that you're going to take every day, those can be inhaled steroids. They can be tablets. They can be capsules. You may also be prescribed oral steroids if you're having an asthma attack or an exacerbation, or if you're having some difficulty with severe asthma control. And last but not least, you may be prescribed biologic medicines. And these are targeted at specific cells of the immune system and specific chemicals from the immune system. And this is why we talked earlier about you may have to give a blood test. And this, again, these biologic medicines are going to be targeted at specific immunological cells that we talked about earlier. So those are kind of that's the big overview of types of drugs that may be part of your treatment regimen. Now, it's important that with all these drugs, steroids, and all the drugs that we talked about, it's important to maintain collaboration, communication with your physician so that you can understand the benefits and the risks of all of these drugs. One of the reasons we highlight the steroids is just the way they work is to reduce inflammation. So that helps us further understand that asthma is a disease of airway inflammation. So we said that some steroids are inhaled as part of the long-term controller regimen, and some of them may be oral in short terms to treat exacerbations or severe asthma. Now, it's important to note that regardless of how well you adhere to your asthma action plan, you still may have acute symptoms of asthma. And whenever that happens, you should immediately contact your healthcare provider. So I'm hopeful today that you've understand or you've learned that asthma is a very common problem. As we've said, as many as 25 million Americans have severe asthma, and as many as 1.25 million patients in the U.S. have severe and uncontrolled asthma. we're hopeful that now you understand how the immune system is working kind of behind the scenes to help cause your asthma, and that you as a patient are unique in terms of the triggers and the irritants that may make your symptoms worse. We're also hopeful that with what we talked about today, you know that you can take steps at home, you can take steps in your lifestyle, you can have better conversations with your healthcare providers. In general, you can be a more active participant in your care. And in general, you're going to feel more empowered to manage the disease. So Natalie and Angela and Angie, that is the end of my part of the presentation. So I thank y'all for your patience, and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for your thoughtful presentation. Thank you, Natalie, for your presentation as well. We have about 6 minutes, and I want to jump right into questions. We've got some fantastic questions in the chat, but I'd like to kick us off if it's okay, and have one question for both you, Bill, and Natalie. And my question, Natalie, for you is, how does someone get involved in your collaborative studies? Can I just reach out to the Black Cardiology Association or Morehouse College and say, hey, I'd like to participate? How does that work for me, just a layperson? How does that work, please?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a few different ways that you can enroll in clinical trials, and usually there are the most common way is to go through a website that's owned by, I want to say, the FDA. I can look for it and link it while maybe Bill's asking another question, but there's a few websites that show like nationwide different trials that are being offered, and you can filter by your disease state and what kind of treatment you personally would need. And when it comes to like the study that I talked about earlier, for example, like I said, like it's a first of its kind study. And I put the link in the chat for where you can enroll in that if anyone's interested or to learn more about it. That's an example of a trial that you get compensated for or paid for. And that's in the case that it's not like a treatment trial necessarily. And then the most highly recommended way, and this is very dependent on person to person, is to talk to your trusted healthcare provider about different treatment options. Sometimes clinical trials are second line or third line options. So if you've tried a therapy and it's not quite doing it for you, especially it's very common with like cancer, for example, there are tons of clinical trials that are offered that are quite literally saving people's lives like on a daily basis. So definitely talking to your trusted healthcare provider about what they know is available, and then maybe navigating the website with them too.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie. And Bill, for someone, and including yours truly, I keep my window open because I like fresh air, coupled with the fact that during COVID, we were told keep our windows open to keep the fresh air coming in. Can you offer any guidance that will allow me to keep my window open, getting that fresh air, and possibly staving off asthma? Any guidance you might be able to share with us?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to deal with my camera. I'm sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
No.
So I think one thing that's important to remember is that you're unique as a patient, right? So I think it depends. A lot of it is what's in the air that you're either trying to keep in or let in, right?
Okay.
So, there were those wildfires in Canada earlier in the summer. And, if smoke like that is a trigger for you, then you want to keep your windows closed and keep that out, right? And likewise, if it's spring and there's a lot of pollen and that's a trigger for you, then you may want to keep your windows closed. So I don't know if there's one answer for you. It's probably one of those, it depends.
Okay, I'll take it. Thank you. And then moving to the chat, we've got some great questions here. And the first question reads, does asthma occur at a certain age?
Yeah, there's some patients, obviously asthma affects a lot of children. So there are, very young children, and But there also are plenty of examples of patients that develop asthma later in life. So I guess to me, the answer is both. That's one of the reasons, when you go and they're trying to work up for asthma, they're going to ask a lot of nosy questions because a lot of times there are conditions that kind of go with asthma, like skin diseases like eczema, atopic dermatitis, and other types of diseases kind of go together. And so sometimes they may put you at risk later in life of developing asthma. And then sometimes kids, just at real young ages, because of some of the reasons we talked about, develop it early.
Okay.
So again, another way to answer, Angie, is just, yes, it depends, both.
Okay, I'll take that one.
Okay.
And then is asthma a preventative? Is that a preventative screening? And if our healthcare provider hasn't broached the conversation of asthma, is that something that we can readily ask for an asthma screening, or must there be an episode in order to get screened for asthma?
Yeah, I mean, now you have to remember that, I'm not a clinician, I'm a scientist. So the way I understand it is that that's one of the reasons that you have to answer all these questions when you go to the doctor. And that's why they want to know if there's a family history of like allergy, asthma, and all these other things, because if there is, that will clue in the provider to be looking. And as time goes on oh, well, maybe I should think about asthma based on what I know about this specific patient.
Okay.
And if you're having different types of symptoms, there are certainly different tests that they can run, Angie, that will help them determine if what you're having is asthma versus other diseases that may be related to the same symptoms.
Okay. And we have time for one more question. And it reads, are there alternative therapies I can use along with my asthma medications?
I think the most important thing to do there, Angie, is to talk to your pharmacist and to talk to your healthcare provider. If you're talking about supplements, often it happens that there's maybe an ingredient in a supplement that would have an interaction with some of the medicines that you're prescribed. So if you have asthma, I think it's really, really important to talk to your healthcare providers to make sure that what you're doing would work with it, or at least not have an interaction or basically be working against you.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could just really quickly add, I'll just say that an alternative, or not alternative, but like additional treatment might not be what we think of traditionally. It might be like a holistic option where, like Bill mentioned, there's a lot of triggers that, you have to determine what those are for you. So it may not sound like a treatment option or a medication, but avoiding certain foods, avoiding certain spaces, making sure that you don't have dust in your house. Those are also kind of like helping you with your treatment of your asthma.
Then that's a perfect segue, Natalie, that we thank you for teaching us this afternoon how to help ourselves better. Again, thank you very much for joining us. And to our audience, if we didn't get to your question, we will share those with Bill and Natalie and ask that they respond, and we'll get back with you. We are exactly at 2:01, and I want to respect everyone's time. Again, I want to thank Bill and Natalie and the Luma team for joining us. We hope you will come back. Look forward to learning more about your research studies, Natalie. Look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Wonderful. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so much for the opportunity. This is wonderful. Thank you.
It's wonderful. And happy Thanksgiving to you both and everyone that's joined us this afternoon.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thanks,
And stay safe.
thanks again, y'all.
Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Bill and Natalie. Thank you, Angie.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.